Hey Rip City, this is Matisse Stivel, and it's time to open the briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Bezos fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, episode 116 of The Briefcase, the first briefcase presented by our friends at Spirit Mountain Casino. Elevate your game. We're so happy, we're so glad to have Spirit Mountain coming on as a presenting sponsor for both The Briefcase and the Blazers Balcony with Brooke. Really appreciate we got a lot of cool stuff planned with Spirit Mountain. I love casinos. I love Spirit Mountain Casino. Grand Ron, Highway 18. If you haven't been out there, definitely check it out. It's a great place to watch a game, great place to spend some time, great place to see a show. I love Spirit Mountain Casino so much. This is just your boy Casey talking from the heart. I love casinos. I love Spirit Mountain. I'm so glad to have a sponsor on the briefcase and on the Blazers Balcony that I actually believe in, that I love. So really happy about that. So Spirit Mountain, thank you so much for joining us. It's going to be great this season. I think you guys are going to enjoy it as well. And on this edition, besides talking about Spirit Mountain Casino, we'll talk about the Trailblazers falling to the Suns in Phoenix to start a 4-game trip, or the fourth game of a 7-game trip, depending on how you count it. The Blazers' third quarter once again being an issue for the Trailblazers. We'll talk a little bit about those third quarters. Obviously, you had the one in Oklahoma City that did not go well for the Trailblazers in Portland, or versus Oklahoma City, I should say. It was in Portland. And then you had another third quarter that kind of sunk Portland's chances in Phoenix on Saturday night, though they were able to come back thanks in large part to Dalano Banton. We'll hear from Dalano Banton on this edition as well. We'll also check in with the game on Monday versus New Orleans. We are here in New Orleans now. The team just arrived in New Orleans from Phoenix this afternoon. Some pretty big injury news for the Trailblazers and the Pelicans. Pelicans missing quite a few players. Trailblazers have one player who has been out for a while now, who has been upgraded to at least questionable for Monday's game versus the Pelicans. That's pretty exciting. We'll talk about that. And we'll also check in after about 10 days, nearly 2 weeks in, on where the Trailblazers rank in terms of their offensive and defensive efficiency. Also check in on how they're doing versus the spread this season, which makes a whole lot of sense more even now that Spirit Mountain has come on. Great place to lay your sports bet at Spirit Mountain Casino. Elevate your game at Spirit Mountain. And all that and more on this edition of The Briefcase. Will the Trailblazers getting this trip or continuing this trip? The joke is that they played 2 games on the road and then played 1 game in Portland and are now back out for 4 games. So you can either call that a 4-game road trip or it's a 7-game road trip, with Portland being one of the stops in that trip. And actually, that's really more the way it feels like. I think we're actually going to be in New Orleans for longer than we were in Portland. At least for that little stretch there. So I think there's a good argument to be made there. But either way, Trailblazers back out on the road, starting this trip, at least this segment of the trip, with a 103-97 loss to the Suns in Phoenix. A bit of an ugly start to the game for both teams, but Trailblazers were able to shake that off and have a pretty good second quarter, able to make a run towards the end of the second quarter to take a 4-point lead into the intermission, 47-43, I should say, Trailblazers going into the intermission. At that point, you felt pretty good about Portland's chances. You knew the third quarter has been an issue for the Trailblazers this season. So you were hoping that maybe they'd be able to avoid that Saturday night in Phoenix. That was not the case. Suns reclaimed the lead within a minute. The Blazers would convert just 7 of their 27 attempts from the field and just 1 of their 11 tries from 3 in the third quarter. And that would end with a 22-point deficit going into the fourth quarter. And at that point, if it was anything like the Oklahoma City game, you assume the game is over. But that was not necessarily the case. To overcome those kind of odds or that much of an advantage against a team like the Suns is pretty uncommon. But it is early in the season. And if you have someone come in and really give you a burst of energy, you never know how the game is going to play out. And that's exactly what happened on Saturday night in the second half, particularly in the particularly in the fourth quarter. Dalano Banton, third-year guard, comes out and has a phenomenal quarter, really kind of sets things off for the Trailblazers, gives them a boost of energy, and really just kind of changes the way the team had been playing. And they get back into the game. They go on a 15-0 run, cut Phoenix's lead to 3 with 1:20 to play. They'd have multiple opportunities to end up at least getting closer. Delano had a 3-pointer that was basically halfway down that rimmed out. Denny Advia had a steal on Devin Booker, running back to try to get the layup, just wasn't able to make it. Blazers end up losing that game by 5. But they end up losing that game by way more were it not for Dalano Banton's effort. I thought that it was, we've been seeing that this season. If it's not Real Repair, then, you have Dalano Banton, a guy who, not necessarily playing a ton of minutes, but, when he gets called in to come into the game and in the fourth quarter, really going out and having an effect on the game and giving the Trailblazers a chance to win. I mean, with Rion in Los Angeles, the Blazers did end up winning that game. With Dalano in Phoenix, they had a very good chance to win that game that they would have not had were it not for his play. And so it almost feels like there's just kind of something going on there a little bit, like if it's taking a guy coming off the bench who doesn't play a whole lot to really kind of spark those things. I mean, on one hand, having fresh legs is always going to be good, but it seems like, there's just something about that boost of energy or just that change of pace that seems to be working for the Trailblazers, particularly in second halves. And so you're hoping that maybe they're able to figure out what that is and utilize it throughout the entire game, because it would be nice if they were able to stay in some of these games, not have to fight their way back into these games because of those third quarters. But that is the way it went, and the Trailblazers, as I mentioned, end up losing that game 103-97. Let's go ahead and hear from Dalano Banton real fast, some of his post-game thoughts after that loss in Phoenix Saturday night.
Tonight, what a burst of offense that you brought, 12 points in 12 minutes. What was kind of going through your mind as you guys were making that comeback?
Not more so was going through my mind, just kind of trying to find ways to impact the game. Coach always preaching staying ready, playing in stay-ready games. So kind of whatever that looks like when you get on the floor. And, I guess that's what it was tonight. But, just trying to make a push at any time, knowing that we're not out of it.
I was talking to Ann about your performance. He's like, yeah, he's a certified hooper. It's nice to feel that support from your teammates. That it's such an impactful part of the game.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ann. Thank you, man.
I mean, to that point, you didn't play until the fourth quarter, and then you come in and really change kind of the complexion of the game for the team. Like, is that difficult? Because it seems like to sit there for 3 quarters and then come out and really have an effect. I think for some guys that might be tough.
Just knowing your situation, right? Coming into the games, knowing that, we have a lot of talent and, a lot of guys that, who have made footprints in this league and, just trying to find ways to help impact when you do get a chance. So whatever that looks like, if that's sitting on the bench for 3 quarters, when you get your name, coach expects you to go out there and run what we have and, do what's called of you and do your part, do what we practice. So I feel like, that doesn't matter if there's 2 minutes left for the whole quarter at the beginning of the game. The expectation stays the same and you gotta play with that, and we're professionals, so you got to meet that expectation.
That last 3 of yours was in, and it wasn't. Did you think it was going in? Because that was a heartbreaker.
Yeah, I did think it was going in, but it's all right, man. We shouldn't have been in that situation anyways. I feel like we got a really good team, and being able to piece it together for 48 minutes is going to be a big thing for us throughout this year. And we feel like we can compete with anyone, but we're having slow starts in the third quarter, so just trying to figure out which ways to do better on that end. But other than that, we shouldn't be in a position down 20 when we got the talent and the size and everything that we have.
Do you have any thoughts on kind of what you guys maybe need to do in those third quarters?
Man, just watch film. I'm pretty sure Coach Chauncey, he always comes up with something great for us to do. Stuff to game plan and stuff to go off of, and so we're gonna watch back tomorrow. I'm pretty sure he's gonna be honest about a lot of things. So kind of just go off what he says. We're all gonna go back, watch the game tonight, and figure it out.
Some interesting stuff from Dalano, a guy who, again, he's a, as Brooke, kind of talked to him about it, and mentioned, is a guy who's a certified hooper, the DB hooper, a guy who just comes out and gets buckets and just kind of plays his style of play. I mean, he probably a little bit different than some of the other point guards on the team. With Ant, you have a guy who is more of a scoring guard, but more of a shooter. In Scoot, you have a guy who's more about getting into the lane and facilitating. And Dalano, with his size and just kind of like the slinky way he plays, like he's just able to get into spots. He gets to his spots really easily, and is definitely probably more of a scoring guard as well, but a guy who I think uses his ability to score and kind of sets the tone with that when he's in games, and then transitions to being more of a playmaker once the defense starts to react to him being a scorer. So I'll be curious to see if he gets any more minutes on this trip. And I thought Chauncey actually had some pretty pointed comments as well about the second unit. And as a matter of fact, let's just go ahead and get to that right now. These are some of Chauncey Billups' comments after the loss Saturday in Phoenix, and particularly kind of talking about the third quarter stuff, and the second unit. The second unit has been a group that has been singled out for praise a lot this season, but when they don't perform, they're going to get singled out for the things that they didn't do so well, and I feel like Chauncey Billups did that Saturday night in Phoenix. So let's go ahead and hear what Chauncey had to say after the loss to the Suns in Phoenix.
Yeah, I just thought we laid it on the line and did what we had to do. Another tough third quarter for us. But, man, we came out and really got ourselves back in the game. I was credit to Dalano. We went with him. I just kind of see him as one of those X-factor type of players that can come in and just kind of make things happen, in particular on the offensive end. But I thought everybody, our defense kind of picked up. We just never caved in the game, and one of those shots go in, you never know what could happen. But I'm proud of our guys for just hanging in. We on the second night of a really tough back-to-back, and came out here and had a really good first half. Got hit with a big blow in that third quarter and just kind of stuck together. This is what you want. You want the guys to stick together and just keep chipping away. And I thought we did that.
Yeah, Coach, where do you kind of land in terms of the emotions about that? Because on one hand, I'm sure you love the comeback and you love the fight, but on the other hand, it's like, we shouldn't put ourselves in that situation in the third quarter again.
Yeah, we shouldn't have, and like I told the guys in there just a second ago, whenever we check in the game, you got to be ready. We went to some of our reserves in that third quarter, and man, it just was, they blew us away quick. So we got to be better about that, and again, like, it's just growing pains. Of course you would love to have that. But it's not so easy to play 4 good quarters against a great team. Let's be honest. You're going to have some of those kind of setbacks just like they did as a good team. You look at what they did in the fourth quarter. We got really aggressive, and we was able to have it our way, So it just happens in the course of an NBA game. It just happens. It's how you actually come back from that. And I was proud of how we did that.
Yeah, a bit tough to tell what it is, but those third quarters for the Trailblazers have been really problematic. Tom Haberstroh had a great stat that the Blazers have a point differential of minus 77 in the third quarter this season and a point differential of plus 20 in the other 3 quarters. So basically what that means in third quarters, the Blazers have been outscored by 77 points this season, and they've played 7 games now. And in the other 3 quarters, they're up 20 points. No, I believe collectively. I don't think he's saying it 20. They're better, 20 points better in every quarter. But in the first, second, and fourth quarter, if you add them all up, subtract what the other team scores, Trailblazers are up 20 points in those quarters, as opposed to the third quarter where they are a negative 77. So that's not imagination. Like, they have just not been playing very well in the third quarter. They've been getting outscored significantly in the third quarter. And that's something that they're gonna need to figure out, because they're really putting themselves in a situation where they can play well for the other 3 quarters, but if you're getting blown out that badly in one quarter, you really don't give yourself a chance to be competitive. So it hopefully maybe that's something that they can be cognizant of. I'm sure they have been. The fact that it's happened 2 games in a row now, and really like a stark as well. Not even just like, we didn't play very well in the third quarter. It's like we got doubled up in the third quarter. And so, you figure that Monday night versus the Pelicans, they really, I assume, are going to make a point of that in the halftime about like, hey guys, like, whatever that thing is happening in the third quarter, we can't do it. Let's just go out there and play hard regardless. Like, missing shots, making shots, doesn't matter. We got to go out there and play with our hair on fire, because we cannot keep allowing these third quarters to really sink our chances to win. And so, again, I feel like Chauncey kind of talked about that in his comments there, and just the importance of coming in and staying ready and being ready to play. And Dalano kind of talked about the same thing. Dalano, a guy who didn't play in the first 3 quarters, and then he gets injected into the fourth quarter and plays really well. And, that's something that's not incredibly easy. The game was already in a flow. Like, everyone else is kind of up to speed in that game. You're kind of getting thrown out there in one quarter, and you're still able to play well because you stayed ready and you prepared yourself. And that's something that, I think a lot of guys on the team could probably take to heart from time to time, is that, regardless of how many minutes you're getting, when you're getting those minutes, what role you're playing, like, this is a team where you have to come in and play hard, or else you're not going to get back out there. And so, I don't know if that's necessarily the issue in the third quarter, but whatever that issue is, you would really hope they're able to get it figured out, because again, it's taking some efforts that the team is putting in those other 3 quarters, and it's just, it's making them for naught. And I think that can be frustrating if it continues on that way. So hopefully they're able to get some of those things figured out here on these last 3 games of this trip: Pelicans, Spurs, Timberwolves. And speaking of the Pelicans, we are here in New Orleans to play the Pelicans on Monday night, 6:30 start time on KATU 2.2 and Blazer Vision. Third meeting between the Trailblazers and the Pelicans in the first 10 days of the NBA season. Kind of a weird little scheduling quirk there. Obviously, you might recall the Trailblazers played consecutive games versus the Pelicans in their first couple games at Moda Center this season. Lost the first game by 2 points, won the second game by, I believe, 20 points. And that was when the Pelicans still had more players. You know, they had lost DeJounte Murray early on in the season, I think in the first or second game with a broken hand. They're also going to be without CJ McCollum and Herb Jones, maybe a few other guys as well. Those are the guys that I know they're going to be without. And so, you know, that's a difficult situation for the Pelicans. Obviously, the Trailblazers, we know more than well enough what it's like to have to deal with injuries. Pelicans are one of those other teams, too, that just kind of feels like they're a little snake bitten by injuries the past couple seasons. And sometimes, you know, that can be helpful for a team to come in, but, you know, when you also kind of distill down your lineup because you have injuries and the Pelicans still have talent, you know, sometimes, you know, the team does respond well to that. So it'll be interesting to see which one of those teams shows up Monday for the Pelicans. One good piece of injury news for the Portland Trailblazers is the team announcing that Robert Williams III has been upgraded to questionable for the game versus the Pelicans. Obviously, Rob hasn't played since early on last season after suffering that knee injury, having surgery that kept him out for the entirety of last season for, I mean, not all of training camp. I mean, he's been participating, but just maybe not to the level that you need to participate in order to be able to get back out there and play games. He is questionable on Monday. I imagine the team will probably have a shoot around Monday morning here in New Orleans. And at that point in time, you know, depending on, you know, I don't know if maybe he's going to have a workout here in New Orleans on Sunday after the team got in. Sometimes what will happen is you'll kind of go through a workout and then the next morning they'll kind of figure out how you feel. And if you feel good, if you haven't had any issues, you haven't had any swelling, then you participate in shoot around. If you go through shoot around, which is, you know, it's a walkthrough basically, so you're not really putting a whole lot of physical activity in, but, you know, just seeing how that knee and that hamstring for Rob kind of comes out of that, I think will probably make the decision on whether or not he plays on Monday. But either way, really good news. Obviously, that means that Rob is getting very close. You know, I saw him going through a workout when the team was in Sacramento, dunking quite a bit, looked really good, looked comfortable. And I imagine that for Rob at this point, too, a lot of it's just kind of like getting over maybe some of the mental issues about being out for as long as he has been. A guy who has dealt with some pretty significant injuries throughout his career. So, again, I imagine that there's probably a mental hurdle that needs to be overcome there for Rob. But I'm really excited for him. Such a great guy. I'm really, really excited to see what he can bring to this team, both on and off the court. Rob, a guy too who has been a really important mentor for a lot of guys on this team, particularly Donovan Clingan. You know, I think both Rob and DeAndre have really kind of taken Donovan under their wings and are really kind of trying to show him the ropes about being a big man in the NBA. So that's something that's a little harder to do when you're not playing. So being able to be out there with Donovan, or at least being able to be out there and have that credibility of like, hey, you know, I'm a player too, I think it's gonna be really helpful. But more than anything, I'm just really happy for Rob, a guy who, again, just a great human, a great person, a guy who deserves to have good things happen. So I'm really excited for Rob. I'm excited for the Trailblazers. If he doesn't get into the game on Monday, I expect that probably at some point in time before the end of this trip that he will get into one of those games. I'm guessing he's probably not at the point where he's going to be playing both games on a back-to-back. So I imagine if he plays in San Antonio, he probably won't play versus Minneapolis or Minnesota in Minneapolis. And if he does play, or if he doesn't play versus the Spurs, then I think it probably improves the chances that he does end up playing versus the Timberwolves. Spurs seems like the two of those games, if he doesn't play on Monday, that you would probably target, but who's to say? It really does come down to his health. So either way, long story, incredible, or short story long, I guess. Robert Williams almost back. Great news. Welcome back, Rob. And speaking of welcoming, our good friends at Spirit Mountain Casino will be welcoming the 90s rock band Collective Soul to Spirit Mountain Casino on November 8th. With chart-topping hits like Shine in December, you will not want to miss out on this legendary performance. There are some seats still available for that show, so go ahead and call up the Spirit Mountain box office to reserve your seats now. I have seen shows at Spirit Mountain. I actually saw Bob Newhart at Spirit Mountain years and years ago. It was phenomenal. Rest in peace, Bob Newhart. Collective Soul, as a 90s kid myself, plenty of experiences and memories of listening to Collective Soul. I could probably sing the entirety of Shine to you as of right now, but I won't do that because I would rather you not turn off this podcast. But Collective Soul, November 8th, Spirit Mountain Casino. Check it out. Tickets still available. It's a quick drive down Highway 18, stay at Spirit Mountain, go to the show, play some games, do some sports betting, maybe jaunt off to the coast right after, and then hit up Spirit Mountain on your way back from the coast. It's a great option. Spirit Mountain Casino, elevate your game. Collective Soul, November 8th. Check it out. Well, now with a few games under their belt, about the time we can start looking at the Trailblazers' offensive and defensive ratings and how they stack up versus other teams. Portland's offensive rating is 28th at 106.4 points scored per 100 possessions. In contrast, the Celtics lead the league at 122.5 points scored per 100 possessions, while Utah is in last place with 97.7 points scored per 100 possessions. Boy, that is not a lot of points for 100 possessions. So the Trailblazers 28th in offense right now, offensive efficiency. They have played some pretty tough defensive teams, but that was something that you would rather, you obviously see that number like to tick up as the season goes on. But better news on the other side of the ball, Trailblazers are 18th in defensive efficiency at 114.5 points allowed per 100 possessions. Again, in contrast, the Thunder lead the league at 95.1 points allowed per 100 possessions, which is just ridiculous, by the way. And the Hornets are in last at 119.4 points allowed per 100 possessions. The difference between your offensive rating and your defensive rating is your net rating, and Portland's net rating is minus 8.1, which ranks 27th in the NBA, ahead of the Pistons, 76ers, and Jazz. So, offensively, still quite a ways to go. Defensively, I'd say a good place to start. You want to be, if you're Portland, when you're trying to kind of make some headway, I think being league average in defense is a good goal for this team. And at 18, 7 games in, I'd say that's a pretty good place to be. And you would hope that as the season goes on and as the team gets to know each other a little more, as they gel a bit more, you would hope that would improve. So, but a decent place to be defensively. Obviously, offensively, you need to make some strides there if you want to be more competitive. Being 28th in offensive efficiency is, you'd be better if you were a little higher up. And finally, in our Betting on the Blazers segment, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino, Trailblazers are 4-2-1 versus the spread this season. They failed to cover versus the Thunder. They were 11-point underdogs, which, to be perfectly honest, I was pretty surprised they were only 11-point underdogs to the Thunder, considering how well they're playing. So that line was 11. The Trailblazers ended up losing that game by 23. But they did cover versus the Suns. They were 13-point underdogs in that game, and they ended up losing by 5. So the Blazers, as I mentioned, 4-2-1 versus the spread this season. As for Monday night's game, the Trailblazers open up as 2.5-point underdogs versus the Pelicans for Monday night's game here in New Orleans. And with 2 wins, Trailblazers are 9% of the way to covering their season win projection of 21.5 wins after roughly 8% of the season. Again, probably a little bit too early to be tracking such things, but if you're someone that's really deep in the weeds on that kind of stuff, I would say that they are on track right now to surpass their over. Though Blazers have been a team throughout the last couple seasons where they win more games at the front end of the season than in the back end of the season. So that's probably something to consider there as well. But at least in terms of just how many games they've played, what percentage that is versus the percentage of their way to that over, they're about 8%, as I mentioned, to the over after about 7% of the season. Or 9% of the way to the over after 8% of the season. Again, these are things that are too early to worry about anyways, but for informational purposes, there you go. And that will do it for this edition of The Briefcase presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Thank you so much for joining me as always. More editions from the road as the Trailblazers are out here this next week as we continue on this 4-game road trip. New Orleans on Monday, Tuesday. Every team is off on Tuesday for Election Day. Blazers also off on Wednesday. Then have a back-to-back versus the Spurs on Thursday. Wrapping up the trip versus the Timberwolves on Friday in Minneapolis. So until we talk to you next time, thanks so much for joining me. As always, I am Casey Holdahl. You have been watching The Briefcase presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Elevate your game. We'll talk soon. Go Blazers.